My name is Daniel, though back then everyone just called me Danny. I must have been in second or third grade when this happened. At that age, most memories blur together. Birthday parties, field trips, sleepovers. But this one stands out. It's the kind of memory that sticks to you like a scar. It was a Friday in late October, the kind of day where the weather feels angry at the world. Rain had been pounding down since the early morning, drenching everything, flooding sidewalks, knocking out power lines. My parents, Claire and Martin, picked me up from school, but didn't stay home long. They had some kind of charity banquet to attend in downtown Chicago. At the time, I didn't care much what it was. I only knew they were supposed to be back that night, but storms have a way of changing plans. By 9 p.m., the rain turned into a wall of water and wind strong enough to topple trees. Driving the 40 minutes back to our suburb became too dangerous. My parents called me from my dad's old flip phone to explain they'd stay overnight at a friend's house nearby. I remember my mom's voice, unusually tense. She made me promise I'd follow a checklist. Lock every door, check the windows, pull down the blinds, and keep one light on in the living room. I wasn't thrilled about the instructions. I was 8 years old, not a baby, and to me it sounded like overkill. Still, I agreed, because I could tell she was nervous. The truth? I was secretly excited. Having the whole house to myself meant no bedtime, unlimited candy from the Halloween stash, and hours of cartoons. It felt like a tiny slice of freedom. I sprawled across the living room couch, a blanket over my shoulders and a pile of candy wrappers on the floor. I told myself I'd do all the chores before bed, but sugar has a way of betraying kids, and somewhere between a commercial break and the next cartoon, I drifted off. When I woke up, the TV had already gone to its sleep screen, meaning at least a couple of hours had passed. The first thing I noticed was the cold. Not the normal nighttime chill. This was sharp, biting, unnatural. The air in the house felt like someone had left a window open in the dead of winter. I pulled the blanket tighter, but then remembered my mom's list. Guilt hit me instantly. If I didn't do what she asked, she'd find out. Parents always know. So half asleep, I dragged myself off the couch and did a lap around the house. Front door, locked. Backsliding door, locked. Windows shut. Blinds down. Everything was sealed, yet the chill clung to me. I touched the glass of the kitchen window just to be sure, but it was solid, no draft at all. My kid brain came up with a quick explanation. Maybe the storm had knocked out the heat. That was easier to believe than anything else. Satisfied, I trudged upstairs to my room. That's when I realized just how violent the storm had become. From the living room, tucked in the middle of the house, the sound had been muffled. But my bedroom had a huge window facing the backyard. Rain lashed against it in sheets, and every flash of lightning lit up the entire block. Thunder crashed so loud it rattled the glass. I wasn't scared of storms, not usually. But that night, I couldn't shake the thought of a tree snapping and crashing through the roof. I lay in bed listening, trying to convince myself to fall asleep. That's when I heard it. Creak. Not thunder, not wind. A slow, dragging creak, like wood shifting under weight. But my floor was carpeted. Nothing in my room should have made that sound. At first, I dismissed it. Houses make noises during storms. But then it came again, longer this time. My stomach knotted. Something about it felt wrong. Lightning flashed, bleaching my room in white for a split second. My eyes darted to the corner. Everything looked normal. My toy chest, my bookshelf, my posters. And then the light was gone. Another flash. Another moment of daylight in the storm. And that's when I saw it. The closet door. It was cracked open. I knew I'd shut it earlier. I was obsessive about it. I couldn't sleep with the closet open, ever. My blood ran cold. Something had opened it. I didn't scream. I didn't even breathe. Instinct took over. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could and crept toward the door. The few feet between me and safety felt endless. When I finally stepped into the hallway, I bolted down the stairs and crawled under the dining table, trembling so hard my teeth clicked. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, not steady ones. They weren't the rhythmic thuds of someone walking downstairs. They were uneven, erratic, like whoever it was couldn't quite keep their balance. Thump, drag, thump. Closer, I pressed myself against the carpet under the table, praying they wouldn't hear my breathing. My heart hammered so loud I swore it would give me away. Then I saw them. Feet. Bare, muddy feet. The skin was pale, almost yellow, with streaks of grime and blood, like they'd been walking barefoot through brambles and broken glass. The toenails were dark, cracked, jagged. They stumbled forward until they were only a few feet away. Then something heavy clattered to the ground, a wrench. The sound nearly made me yelp, but I bit down on my tongue. If they bent down to pick it up, they'd see me. They froze, standing over the wrench. Seconds stretched into years. Rain hammered the windows. Lightning flashed again, and I caught the faintest glimpse of their knees, torn up with cuts and bruises, shaking under their weight. Finally, they staggered forward, leaving the wrench behind. I listened as their footsteps dragged across the first floor. My whole body tensed when I heard the front door open. A gust of cold air rushed in. Then, slam, silence. They were gone. I don't know how long I stayed under that table, but it felt like forever. When I finally crawled out, my legs were so weak I could barely stand. I picked up the wrench. It felt cold, damp, heavier than I expected, and set it quietly on the counter. Then I relocked the front door, crept upstairs, and collapsed in bed. By some miracle, I fell asleep. For weeks, I told no one, not my parents, not my friends. I was terrified they'd blame me for not locking the doors soon enough, or worse, that they wouldn't believe me. And honestly, a part of me wanted to pretend it hadn't happened. But years later, as a teenager, I finally told my parents. My mom's face went pale, and my dad asked me to repeat every detail. When I mentioned the wrench, something in their expression shifted. Turns out, a few houses down the block, a break-in had been reported that same stormy night. The burglar never got caught. The police mentioned he likely carried tools with him. Crowbars, wrenches, lockpicks. I don't know what I saw. A deranged stranger? A criminal who picked the wrong house? Or something worse, something that doesn't belong in the world of explanations. But one thing I know for sure, from that night on, I never left a door unlocked, and I never, ever slept with the closet open. When I was a kid growing up in the suburbs of Ohio, I used to have this recurring half-lucid nightmare. I can't remember exactly how old I was when it started, maybe 8 or 9, but I know it went on for years. It didn't happen every night. In fact, that's what made it scarier. The dreams would show up out of nowhere, months apart, and I never knew when the next one was coming. From what I can remember, here's how it would go. I'd be lying in bed, but my perspective wasn't normal. It was like I was floating above myself, watching my own body from the ceiling, as though there was a security camera feed playing in my head. That out-of-body dissociation always terrified me. I'd try to push myself down, to swim toward my body, but I could never move, other than swiveling my head to look around. That's when the details would start changing. My bedroom looked the same as in real life, but something was always off. The first thing I usually noticed was the digital clock on my nightstand. Instead of ticking forward, the numbers would be counting backward. I don't know why, but watching the minutes erase themselves filled me with dread. Then, once I spotted that, more strangeness would reveal itself. I'd see crayon drawings taped to the walls. I wasn't the kind of kid who drew much, so I knew they weren't mine. Every picture was the same. A group of people holding hands, all smiling, and one smaller figure who I assumed was supposed to be me. They were always standing in front of a house with a green roof, not blue like in the old version of this dream, always green in mine. Then there was my toy fire truck. I had lost it years before, but in the dream it was always there, only in a different place every time. Sometimes on the floor, sometimes perched on my desk, sometimes halfway under my bed, like someone had been playing with it. And then, without fail, I'd get an urge I couldn't resist. I'd turn my head toward the window, and every time, right on cue, there would be a man standing inches away on the other side of the glass. He wasn't young, maybe late 40s, early 50s. Short cropped gray hair, sharp cheekbones, and a pale scar running diagonally across his temple. His face was hard to remember in detail, almost like it was smudged, but that scar was always clear. He never spoke. He just stared at me. And then slowly his hands would rise and he'd start clawing at the glass, scratching like he wanted in. That's when I always woke up, heart pounding, too afraid to move. Sometimes I'd run straight to the window. Sometimes I'd freeze for 10 minutes before forcing myself to look. Either way, there was never anything there. No scratches, no footprints, nothing. After the fourth time, I finally told my parents. My mom, Linda, brushed it off, saying kids my age often had recurring dreams. My dad, Mark, tried to reassure me by saying they were just down the hall if I ever felt unsafe. But my dad could see I wasn't convinced. That night, he actually walked with me around the outside of the house, flashlight in hand, checking every window and corner. Of course, we found nothing. For a while, the dreams went away. 6 months passed without a single episode, and I almost believed it was over. But then, one random night, it returned. This time, the sequence was identical, except for one terrifying difference. When I turned toward the window, it wasn't just the man standing there. The window was open. I woke up instantly, paralyzed. For 5 long minutes, I couldn't move. My brain screamed at me to check the window, but my body wouldn't respond. To make it worse, I felt a rush of cold air brushing against my face. I was convinced he was already inside, standing just beyond my vision. When I finally broke free and leapt to the window, it was locked shut. But I couldn't sleep again that night. From then on, I had obsessed over the dream. I even started writing down notes after each one, trying to find patterns. Sometimes the drawings on the walls were different. Once the people weren't smiling. Another time, one figure was missing from the chain. The dream slowed down, but they never fully went away. And one day, when I described the man to my parents in more detail, the scar on his temple, his age, I noticed their faces change. My mom went quiet, and my dad actually interrupted me mid-sentence to ask if I was absolutely sure about the scar. When I said yes, they exchanged a look. Not fear exactly, but recognition. and then they brushed it off, claiming it was nothing. A few days later, though, they sat me down. My mom did most of the talking. She explained that years before, when I was a toddler, a close family friend named David Hale used to babysit me. He wasn't related, but they had me call him Uncle David. He spent a lot of time with me, sometimes entire weekends if both my parents were working. But then something happened. My dad never told me the full story, only that there was a falling out so severe that David was forbidden from ever coming near me again. They cut ties completely. Here's the part that made my stomach drop. David Hale had a scar on his forehead from a car accident years before I was even born. They never said the connection out loud, but they didn't need to. I was old enough to put the pieces together. Later that night, when my mom had gone to bed, my dad lingered in the living room with me. After a long silence, he admitted his theory. He thought my brain was dredging up buried memories from when I was too young to understand them. Maybe that's why I dreamed of David, scar and all. Even though I had no conscious memory of him, I wanted to believe him, but something felt off. The years went on. The dream slowed once or twice a year, but then in the fourth year, something happened that still makes my skin crawl. I woke from the dream, heart pounding, and instinctively glanced at the window, and I saw a movement, just a flicker, a shadow slipping away. I screamed for my parents. My dad ran outside barefoot, flashlight shaking in his hands, while my mom clutched me tight. When my dad came back, he whispered something to my mom before calling the police, or at least pretending to. I never heard sirens, never saw an officer that night. The next morning, my dad admitted he had found faint footprints in the dirt beneath my window. I asked if he thought it was David. He said that was impossible. David didn't know where we lived anymore, but the way he said it didn't convince me. And here's the strangest part. I never had that dream again after that night. Not once. It just stopped. Even now, as an adult, my parents refuse to talk about it. I've asked, but they shut it down. My gut tells me they know more than they ever admitted, because the thought I can't shake, the one that makes me shiver even now, is this. What if every time I dreamed of him, David was really there? What if the dreams weren't just my brain digging up old memories, but my mind reacting to someone standing outside my window in the real world? And if that's true, then who or what was actually watching me all those years? The knocking came again, same rhythm. Before I could stop him, Tyler shouted, "Who's there?" in this loud, bold voice. I nearly punched him. Now whoever was outside knew we were definitely down there. After a pause, a voice finally answered. It was muffled through the glass, but sounded disturbingly cheerful. "Hey, come around back. Open up." It was a teenager's voice, high-pitched but natural, not an adult pretending. I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine. My friends, on the other hand, looked amused, like it was a game. They started whispering about how maybe another kid from our school had tracked us down. They pressured me to check it out. Against every instinct, I went upstairs. We crept to the back door, my heart pounding like crazy. Through the narrow glass pane, I could make out a figure under the dim porch light. He stood completely still, hands at his sides, head slightly tilted. As I got closer, his face came into view. I froze. It was him, the same face from the yearbook photo. Christopher Hale Jr. My stomach dropped. He shouldn't have even known where I lived. Ethan and Marcus reached for the lock, but I stopped them, blurting out that I knew who it was. I explained the yearbook thing in a rush, and suddenly they weren't so eager anymore. Christopher, still standing outside, noticed our hesitation. Slowly he raised his arm and gestured toward the side of the house, motioning like he wanted me to come closer to the window. Something about the way he moved, mechanical, too smooth, set me on edge. I cracked the kitchen window open just an inch, with my friend standing behind me. "Christopher?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why are you here? How do you know me?" His lips curled into this unsettling smile. "So, you got my message." I swallowed hard. "What do you want?" He leaned closer to the glass. His eyes looked hollow in the porch light. "I've been watching you. We could have been friends. We should have been friends." I forced myself to nod just to keep things calm. Yeah, maybe. I lied. But then Marcus, being Marcus, muttered under his breath, "Dude's a freaking stalker." That's when everything changed. Christopher's expression twisted, his smile collapsing into something sharp and hateful. His head jerked to the side, almost animalistic, and then he screamed. His voice was shrill but furious, filled with rage. "You don't deserve them. You don't deserve any of this. I know all your secrets. I know your ex hates you. I know what your friends say when you're not around. I know everything." My blood ran cold. There was no way he could have known some of the stuff he was yelling. He lunged toward the window, clawing at the frame, trying to force it open. I slammed it shut and locked it. He began pounding on the glass with his fists, his face twisted with fury. For a second, I thought he was actually going to shatter it. The noise finally woke my parents. They stormed downstairs, demanding to know what was going on. As soon as the lights flicked on, Christopher bolted. My dad ran outside barefoot in his pajama pants, but when he got to the yard, there was nothing. Just silence and wet grass. The next morning, my parents called the school. That's when we learned something that still makes me sick. Christopher Hale Jr. had been expelled a month before the year ended. His name shouldn't have even been in the yearbook, but since they were printed earlier, his photo remained. He wasn't supposed to be on campus at all, which meant that to write that message in my yearbook, he had snuck back into the school without anyone noticing. Worse, nobody could track him down. No address, no active phone numbers, no records of his parents. It was like he didn't exist. The school brushed it off as a troubled kid with mental issues. But I can't explain how he knew where I lived, or how he knew personal details about my life that I hadn't told anyone. My parents were on edge for weeks. Every knock on the door after that, made my chest tighten. Even now, years later, living in that house doesn't feel the same. Every creak at night makes me wonder if Christopher Hale Jr. ever really left, or if he's still watching from somewhere, waiting for the right moment to keep his promise. I'll be seeing you again. This happened a few years ago, back when I was 23. Enough time has passed that I finally feel safe sharing it. At the time, I had just graduated from college and was working my first real job. To save money, I moved back into my parents' house in Connecticut. Rent-free living, a stocked fridge, and my childhood bedroom. It felt almost too good to be true. I knew I was lucky, and I never took it for granted. For the most part, my life was simple. I wasn't the type to go clubbing or chase wild parties. I liked quiet routines. Coffee in the morning, gym after work, reading in bed before sleep. Weekends were usually hiking trips or game nights with friends. But every now and then, my college friends convinced me to step outside my comfort zone. That's how I ended up spending a weekend at my friend Melissa's family beach house in Rhode Island. She had invited me, along with our two closest friends, Hannah and Sophie, for a small getaway. Melissa's parents were both surgeons, and her family's vacation house was incredible. Modern, sleek, and sitting on a private strip of beach far away from the noisy tourist areas. When I first saw it, I couldn't believe it was even real. We decided to bunk together in one of the kids' rooms that had 2 sets of bunk beds and its own little bathroom. Even though there were plenty of separate bedrooms, sharing one felt more fun, like a sleepover. The first night, we kept things pretty chill. We grabbed some White Claws, took a speaker down to the sand, and sat under the stars listening to music. It was perfect, until we noticed something strange. Far down the beach, a light was flickering. At first, we thought it was just a boat offshore, but after a while, it became clear it was a handheld flashlight swinging back and forth. The movement was deliberate. We stopped talking and just stared as it grew closer. Eventually, we saw 3 silhouettes, young men, walking casually along the shore. Their laughter carried through the night, which eased our nerves a little. When one of them called out, "Hey there," in a friendly tone, Melissa waved back. A few minutes later, they reached us. They looked maybe a year or 2 older than we were. Sun-bleached hair, tan skin, the whole beach town look. My friends were definitely into it, especially Sophie, who has always been a bit reckless with guys. The men introduced themselves as Tyler, Eric, and Jason. They cracked open their beers and sat with us in the sand. I won't lie, the conversation was fun. They weren't creepy or overly flirty, just laid back. An hour later, when the drinks were gone, they invited us back to their place. I was tired and had zero interest in hooking up, so I told the girls I'd head back to the house. They begged me to come, but I insisted. It was 3 guys and 3 girls. I wasn't needed as a 7th wheel. I went back, showered, and crawled into my bunk. At around 3 in the morning, I woke to my phone buzzing. It was a FaceTime call from Melissa. Half asleep, I answered. Her face filled the screen, and she was screaming. "Hannah and Sophie have been taken. Get my car now." Her words jolted me like electricity. My whole body went cold. I jumped out of bed, threw on clothes, and bolted downstairs. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely get the keys. I asked why she called me instead of the cops, but she yelled back that she had already called them. She just needed me to move fast. Melissa stayed on the line, guiding me through unlocking the gate and finding her car. She told me the men had forced Hannah and Sophie into an SUV and driven off down the coastal road, maybe 10 houses away. I floored it, heart pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out. Minutes later, I spotted a dark SUV up ahead, driving suspiciously slow. My gut told me it was them. I hung up with Melissa, immediately called the police, and told the dispatcher exactly where I was. They instructed me to keep a safe distance so the men wouldn't notice they were being followed. What felt like an eternity passed before flashing lights appeared in the distance. Relief flooded me until chaos erupted. Police cruisers swarmed the SUV, boxing it in. Officers jumped out, guns drawn, and ripped the 3 men from the vehicle. I pulled over on the shoulder and watched in shock as the scene unfolded. One officer popped open the trunk. Inside were Hannah and Sophie, gagged, their wrists bound, bruises visible even under the dim streetlights. The image is burned into my memory forever. Later, Melissa filled in the gaps. After I left, the drinking continued. Eventually, the men suggested everyone get some sleep. Tyler led Sophie away, Jason pulled Hannah with him, and Eric tried to convince Melissa to stay. When she refused, he grew furious, yelling that she was wasting his time. She stormed out, but halfway back she realized she had forgotten her purse. That's when she saw them, Jason and Tyler shoving Hannah and Sophie into the SUV while Eric kept watch. Melissa hid, waited until they drove off, then called the police and me in a panic. The men were arrested and later revealed to be drifters with long criminal records. The beach house they had been staying in wasn't even theirs. They had broken into a vacation home belonging to an elderly couple who were out of the country. Thanks to Hannah's parents, who were both lawyers, the trial was handled quickly and quietly. The men were convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to decades in prison, but no sentence feels long enough. That night scarred me. For years after, I couldn't set foot on a beach at night without feeling sick. I avoided strangers, isolated myself, and even drifted from my friends. Slowly I recovered, but the thought still haunts me. If I hadn't left early, if Melissa hadn't doubled back for her purse, or if the police had been slower, my friends might never have been found. And sometimes, when I drive along dark coastal roads, I swear I still see the flicker of that flashlight in the distance. This happened last summer, during the 4th of July weekend. My best friend Daniel is heavily involved in the East Coast music scene, particularly electronic and dance festivals that span from Philadelphia to New Jersey, sometimes even New York. He's been building his promotion company for a couple of years, and it's honestly impressive how much he's managed to achieve. His team books high-profile venues, fills them with big-name DJs, and draws crowds by the thousands. I've known Daniel for over 20 years. We grew up together, went through school together, and he's always treated me like family. Because of that, I often get VIP access to his shows, hang out with performers, and experience nightlife most people only dream of. I'm not exactly in that world, but Daniel makes sure I get a front row view of it whenever I visit. That July, Daniel had his biggest event yet planned on the Jersey Shore. It was supposed to be a blowout, complete with fireworks over the boardwalk and some DJ I'd heard even non-festival goers knew about. He asked me to come early to help him out and hang with the team. I agreed immediately. I rode down with him and our other hometown buddy, Ethan, a guy who, like me, doesn't work in music, but is always down for a wild night. The 3 of us reached the venue hours before it opened. Daniel disappeared into his work, meeting with staff, checking sound equipment, making sure everything went off without a hitch. Ethan and I, with nothing to do, wandered toward the open bar. Since the organizers had full access, we were free to help ourselves, and we definitely did. By the time the first act started, Ethan and I were already tipsy. By the time the headliner came on, we were flat out drunk. It was the 4th of July, and that gave us a reason to go all in. Hours blurred. The music was pounding, the lights flashing, and the drinks never stopped flowing. We were in that state where impulse control shuts down, where every idea seems good enough to follow through with. As the night wound down and the crowd thinned, Ethan and I turned our attention to the bar where 2 women were standing. They were striking, not just attractive, but in a way that stood out in a place where everyone was dressed to impress. One of them, with sharp green eyes and jet black hair, introduced herself as Selena. Her friend, a brunette with an almost model-like aura, said her name was Marissa. Something about them was magnetic. Maybe it was the confidence in the way they carried themselves, or maybe it was just that Ethan and I were drunk and reckless. Either way, we struck up a conversation. They laughed at our jokes, bought us drinks, something that felt odd, since usually it's the guys footing the bill. I remember Selena sliding a glass across the Against all better judgment, we agreed. The walk along the shore was surreal. I remember snippets. Selena talking about how the ocean always made her feel grounded. Marissa pointing out the distant fireworks from another town's celebration. For a moment, I forgot how drunk I was, because the conversation was almost too lucid, too interesting. But then something shifted. It hit me like a wave. Not just drunkenness, something heavier. My legs felt weak, as though the sand beneath me was pulling me down. My vision doubled, then corrected, then doubled again. I glanced at Ethan, and I could tell he was feeling it too. His posture had slouched, and his usual grin looked more like a grimace. We arrived at the house, or mansion really. From what I recall, it was massive, with towering windows and a view of the beach that belonged in a movie. Inside, it was all marble floors and abstract art, sculptures placed like we'd walked into some gallery. But my mind was fogging so quickly, it was hard to process. Marissa led Ethan away almost immediately, disappearing into a hallway. That left me with Selena. She leaned closer, whispering something I couldn't make out, and then leaning in for a kiss. That's the last moment I clearly remember. Not the kiss, just her leaning toward me. After that, blackness. Except, not really blackness. There are gaps I can't account for, but I know I didn't pass out. My phone later showed texts I sent, messages to Daniel, my parents, even some friends. The wording sounded like me, casual, normal, but I have no memory of sending them. It was like someone else had been controlling me, mimicking me. The next conscious moment I have is opening my eyes to sunlight burning down on me. I was lying in bushes, disoriented, my head pounding. My clothes weren't mine. They weren't Ethan's either. Just random clothes, loose-fitting, smelling faintly of detergent. My shoes were the only things that belonged to me, but they were soaking wet, their laces missing. My pockets were empty. No phone, no wallet, no keys. I sat there for a long time, trying to piece it together. Nothing made sense. The last thing I remembered was Selena leaning in, and now I was an hour away from the venue, in a place I didn't recognize. Across the road, I spotted a 7-Eleven. It was the only landmark in sight, so I stumbled toward it. The clerk looked at me suspiciously when I asked to borrow his phone, but eventually slid it across. The only number I could remember was my sister's. She picked up, and I tried to explain through my slurred, panicked words. She gave me Ethan's number, which I dialed again and again. No answer. My stomach dropped. Had the same thing happened to him? And then, like some twisted miracle, Ethan walked into the same 7-Eleven. He looked as bad as I felt, wearing clothes that weren't his, shoeless, pale. He saw me, stopped, and for a second we just stared. Then he walked over and said, "Dude, what the hell happened to us?" His story was almost identical to mine. The last thing he remembered was being with Marissa. Then nothing. Then waking up miles away, dressed in someone else's clothes, missing everything he owned. We called the police. To their credit, they listened at first. But as we recounted the bizarre details, strange women, blackout without passing out, clothes switched, belongings stolen, their skepticism grew. They hinted we'd just been too drunk, that maybe we'd wandered off. They weren't buying it. But my sister had been tracking my phone. It pinged from a parking lot not far away. The police drove us there, and sure enough, both my phone and Ethan's were sitting on the pavement side by side. Untouched. Cards missing, but never used. That discovery only fueled the police's belief we were exaggerating. They suggested we dropped everything while stumbling around drunk. They refused to check out the house Marissa had brought us to. After being dismissed, Ethan and I weren't satisfied. Days later, we retraced our steps, walking along the boardwalk until we spotted the house. It was exactly as we remembered, grand, imposing. We rang the bell. An older man answered. When I asked if a girl named Marissa lived there, or if he had daughters our age, he said no. Flat number, no hesitation. I tried brushing it off, made some excuse about a mix-up. He chuckled and closed the door. But walking away, my stomach sank. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Ethan and I still talk about it, replaying every detail, trying to make sense of it. We were drugged, but by what? Why change our clothes? Why abandon us in another town? Why send texts that sounded exactly like us but didn't align with the truth? We'll probably never know. But the feeling, the gut-deep certainty that something larger and darker was at play, that's something we'll carry with us forever.